Thanks for tuning in to Ag PhD. I'm Brian Hefty.
I'm Darren Hefty. We really appreciate you joining us today because we're going to talk about one of the problems that plagues soils across America. It's low pH soils. We're going to talk about how we got to a low pH soil and what we can do to fix it.
We're also going to talk a little about fall pasture spraying. A lot of people will say this is the best time of year to spray, but there are a few things you have to know going into this fall season.
Well, one thing you really want to pay attention to as well is our weed of the week. We'll show you how to stop this tough weed. But first, here's our farm basics.
You spend all year working hard to get as much yield as possible at harvest. The last thing you want to do is put your grain in the bin and have it spoil before you take it to market. Introducing the Grain Temp Guard from Farm Shop MFG. Designed and built by a farmer looking for a low-cost monitoring solution for existing bins, the Grain Temp Guard tracks temperature and humidity with an alarm system to alert you when your grain exceeds safe thresholds. For more information on a system for your bins, visit farmshopmfg.com.
During our farm basics time today, we're going to talk a little about corn reproduction. This actually started, I was just telling Darren, my daughter, my 15-year-old daughter, was asking a little about corn, and I was more than happy to explain to her what's going on with that corn plant. This reproduction stage, it starts with tassel. You'll see the tassels coming out above. That's what got her curiosity. Hey, what are those things on top of the corn plant?
Well, you'll kind of see the tassels first, Brian, but you also see the silks. So sometimes you may see those silks emerging just a little bit ahead of the tassels. So there's two things that work together. With the tassel, that's going to have the pollen, and that's thought of as the male portion of the plant. The silks are coming out the end of the ear. That's thought of as the female portion of the plant. And as that tassel sheds pollen, the pollen's going to land anywhere on those silks, and that's going to fertilize each one of those silks.
The interesting thing here with these silks is every silk is connected to where a kernel will be on that ear. So there are going to be lots of silks that are hanging out the end. Now, once the kernel gets pollinated, then that silk will detach itself. So eventually what we get to is what we call the brown silk stage, because all those silks have detached themselves because all the kernels are pollinated. Once they're detached, well, they're not hooked up to the plant, they're going to die, and that's why they turn brown.
Once we've got that process has happened, we've got blisters, so we've got those little kernels will just start to bubble up just a little bit and start to fill up with moisture and with nutrients. That's going to be the first stage that we'll see happen after the brown silk.
Yeah, and honestly, I don't even pay all that much attention after that point to, okay, what's the name of this stage or that stage? But what ends up happening is that kernel gets a lot bigger, fills itself with nutrients, and then you get to stages like, for example, the milk stage or dough stage.
Yeah, okay, it's the milk stage and the dough stage, and what's happening is we're accumulating a lot more moisture in there. Then as the dry matter accumulation starts, farmers will see we're getting closer to harvest. And then we'll see what's called dent stage, which I find very interesting, that the kernel that was full of moisture and nutrients, now a lot of that moisture is going away, and the end of the kernel will dent in a little bit. Now, if you can pack enough nutrients in the kernel, it doesn't have to necessarily dent, but that kernel is basically getting drier and drier. It's more dry matter in there and less moisture.
Yep, and so at that point, if you look closely on the kernel, you can actually see where what we call the milk line is, what part of that kernel is hard and what part of that kernel still needs to mature yet. And ultimately, we get to what's called black layer. What happens there is if we can peel that kernel back off the ear, you can see there's black right at the end. And
basically, the little umbilical cord from the cob to that kernel is now severed because it's not needed anymore, so that turns black, and that's what black layer is. And at that point, we're still, what, 35% moisture in the kernel?
Yep, roughly. And
so for farmers to harvest that grain, they want to see that moisture down even a little bit lower. So farmers will leave it in the field until it's down to 20 or 25%, in some cases a little drier, depending on where you're at. Then at that point they can harvest that kernel.
So once again, with corn reproduction, it all starts with tassel, it's going to end with black layer, and then eventually what we say is dry down after it's fully mature. But the reason why we wanted to talk about this today is if you're a non-farmer, you may have wondered, well, how does this process all happen, and why are those tassels there, and what's going on with the silks? We just thought we would explain that today.
Well, one other thing we will explain later in the show is how to stop our weed of the week. Can you identify this week's weed?
Do you feel like there's never enough time to get everything done before planting? The window for spring work is quick and unforgiving. Give yourself the upper hand with the ProTill High Performance High Speed Disc. More and more farmers agree the ProTill is the right tool for springfield conditions and heavy residue management. Zero maintenance bearings, independent disc technology, oversized pins and bushings allow the ProTill to handle whatever field or conditions you can throw at it. Degelman High Performance Equipment.
Avoid the V-shaped pattern of injury caused by chemical buildup in your booms. The Express End Cap from Hypro eliminates the dead ends that lead to herbicide buildup and provides easy access to your booms, giving a complete flush between applications. Hypro, helping you spray better.
Tough, precise, efficient. Strip tillage with the Soil Warrior brings the future to your farm. Learn more at soilwarrior.com/agphd.
I need results, so I choose the one system I trust to take weeds down and keep them down on even my toughest acres with the kind of yield potential that helps keep me in the black to deliver my kind of results season after season. I choose the Roundup Ready Extend crop system. I choose results.
I've been completely satisfied with the job that XtendiMax has done.
It's a good product. It kills the weeds.
I'm extremely happy with my weed control. We're going 100% Xtend next year as well.
This might be the best overall farm average on soybeans I'll have.
It works so much better than anything else that we used in the past.
It's been remarkable. We have seen a tremendous yield potential increase.
The XtendiMax takes the weeds down.
It just flat out works.
I mentioned earlier in the show that a lot of people think fall is the best time for pasture spraying. But here's the number one thing that I worry about: frost. Now, obviously, it depends on where you're at in the United States, but for us, we farm in South Dakota, and very often we will get frost sometime in September, and it could even happen in early September. The reason why I worry about this is what frost does is it kills off a lot of the top growth, or maybe even all the top growth on a plant. So if you spray and the very next day or two you get this frost, well, your herbicide may not have moved down into the growing points that could be below ground on a perennial weed or even a biennial weed. So the number one thing that I wanted to stress today to you is make sure you get your fall spraying done, preferably 1 to 2 weeks before your first hard killing frost.
Well, timing is really important, Brian, but then you've got to think about what you've got out there for weeds and choosing the right product. I hear a lot of issues that farmers and ranchers have. Well, I sprayed my pasture, but I missed this weed or I missed that weed, and there are quite a few choices now. I remember when we were growing up, Brian, it was, well, do I use 2,4-D or do I use dicamba? Then Tordon, and it's like, oh, okay, we got a few choices, but I know I can't use Tordon right close to water or something like that, so I'm back to 2,4-D and dicamba. Well, now we've got lots of things with Milestone, with Ally or Cimarron.
Well, wait. Let's start with one at a time. So Darren mentioned Milestone. Milestone is the very best product there is for thistles. So if you say, hey, my problem is thistle, I want Milestone.
But some people say, I used Milestone, it didn't kill the thistles. Guess what? What rate did you use on the Milestone?
With Milestone, the rate we want you using, if you've got thistle patches out there or lots of thistles, 7 ounces. Use the full rate. Yes, it's going to cost some money, but it's going to leave a tremendous amount of residual. It's not going to leave as much residual as Tordon, but it is going to leave lots of residual. You'll see that residual for years on your thistles. With Tordon, that actually can have residual for maybe 5 to 10 years. It's crazy how much residual Tordon can have. Tordon was always the product we recommended for thistle in pasture. Now it's a little step below Milestone, but it's still a really good product. And Tordon has good activity on a number of other weeds like leafy spurge and volunteer trees.
Well, one, if you don't want any residual that farmers and ranchers will choose, is Remedy. It's a good product, especially if you've got a little brush out in the field as well, or the pasture, because Remedy can kill some of those types of plants, those woody species, but it doesn't leave a soil residual. So if you say, you know, this is a pasture that may go to crop ground in a year or two, that would be a good option that you may consider.
Speaking of woody species, a lot of people will pick chaparral. That's a combination of milestone and ally. Now, ally is one of those old SU or sulfonylurea herbicides, so it's in that same chemical family as the ALS products. So if you have ALS resistant weeds, it's not going to control those. But ally does have a lot of residual, so together with milestone in chaparral, you've got a product that's got lots of residual, really good on thistles, and real good on brush.
Now, what we'll see many times is to cheapen up some of those more expensive, longer lasting products like a milestone or a Tordon, there'll be premixes available with a certain type of 2,4-D. Now, there's some differences in the 2,4-Ds that you can get between amines and esters and the new 2,4-D choline.
So Darren's talking about Freelex, and one of my saddest days of this year was when Corteva pulled Freelex from the market. And the reason why they did that, and I can't say they pulled it entirely from the market, but they pulled it from much of where we farm, and we can't use it now in our pastures. And they did this entirely because some people were using that product off-label on enlist crops. So anyway, we are certainly hoping and begging Corteva to bring Freelex back. It is 2,4-D like you've never seen before without all the volatility and drift. Now, one other product that I did want to mention today, if you've liked 2,4-D in the past, you will really like Distinct. Distinct also doesn't have lots of residual, it's got a little bit, but Distinct is the same thing as Status, only it doesn't have the corn safener, and it's about 1/3 the price. You can go with 6 ounces of Distinct, that's the same or equivalent as 7.5 ounces of Status. It's a tremendous product, one of the best herbicides we've ever seen. Yes, it's not as good on perennials as what Milestone or Tordon will be, but on everything else, it is lights out.
Well, there are lots of choices for spraying weeds in the fall in your pasture. We just encourage you to get out at least a couple of weeks ahead of your first frost to get the best activity.
One of the weeds you may see out in your pasture is our Weed of the Week. Can you identify this week's weed?
At Harvest, you have one goal: finding the perfect flow of grain from the field to the bin. Case IH axial flow combines are engineered for matched capacity to deliver proven grain savings, so you can keep efficiency flowing smoothly. Find yours with the Case IH axial flow.
In 1949, Morton Buildings constructed our first machine storage building to establish our bond with the farming community. Since then, our relationship has grown, and so have our product offerings. From the smallest specialized operation to the largest agricultural enterprise, we understand the needs of your business and continue to evolve to meet industry demands. Plus, when you build a Morton building, you're backed by the strongest warranty in the business. To learn more about the Morton Advantage, visit mortonbuildings.com.
Out here, great yield starts with great weed control. That's why I choose the Roundup Ready Extend crop system, the system that makes the difference. Because only I know what it takes out here. Yield's what it's all for. But keeping my fields clean all season, that's what it's all about. This is my field.
There are a lot of steps to having a perfect season. Don't let your fertilizer plan be the step that trips you up. No matter when you apply fertilizer, no matter how, AgroLiquid has the experts and the products that'll help you move closer to your target and hit the bullseye. AgroLiquid moves you closer to your target.
At Estes Performance Concaves, we know how valuable your time is at harvest. That's why we designed the new XPR concave system. The XPR system is the #1 performance concave system on the market, surpassing the rest in both speed and efficiency, ensuring every last grain from your field gets into your tank. Plus, XPR concaves work for all row crops. No more changing concaves, meaning you have less downtime. Take back your bushels this harvest. Get Estes Performance Concaves in your combine today.
Last week on the show, we talked about how to fix high pH soil. This week, we're going to talk about low pH soil. So first of all, to identify this issue, you need a soil test. You're going to look at two things. You're going to look at the soil pH, but we also want you to take a look at what is your base saturation hydrogen number. The reason why you look at that is the only reason a soil has hydrogen is the pH is below 7. The higher that base saturation hydrogen number, the lower your pH, and that should correlate together with that soil pH number being low on your soil test.
Now, in some parts of the world, soils are naturally low in pH. Before they've ever been farmed, the first soil test you ever pulled out on virgin ground said, well, hey, our pH is really, really low. I was in an area in Brazil where the pH was often in the 4s before they were even farming that ground. So it's not like farming practices cause pH to be low in all cases. However, in some soils, farming practices are causing soils to be low in pH, because I talk to farmers that say, well, every few years, I've got to put a solution out there for low pH soil again. Even if I fix it, I don't have anything long term. So we want to address that issue as well.
One of the things that can cause soil pH to go down is when you have excess nitrogen out there. So let's just say that your crop can't use all the nitrogen that you've applied, or for that matter, your soil has so much organic matter and it produces a lot of its own nitrogen, and then that nitrogen is in excess too. This can happen even in a year where you raise zero crop. If you have nothing out there and your soil is producing a bunch of nitrogen, well, where's that nitrogen going? When you have rainfall, and especially excess rainfall, what will happen is a lot of that nitrogen will convert over to nitrate. Then a lot of that will convert to nitric acid, and it will strip out calcium out of your soil. When it does that, obviously pH is going down.
So what is the solution to that? Well, of course, you would add more calcium to the soil, and the most common way to do that is by putting out lime, which is calcium carbonate. Now with lime, as you're putting that out on soil, that calcium carbonate is going to combine with your excess hydrogen in the soil to produce water, carbon dioxide, and free calcium.
With the calcium carbonate you get for your soil, you basically have two choices: calcitic lime, which is high in calcium, and dolomitic lime, which is high in magnesium. Still got a lot of calcium, but it's much higher in magnesium. In our soils, we naturally have lots of magnesium, so I don't want any more. I don't want the dolomitic lime. What I want is calcitic lime. But if you're also short on magnesium, then get that dolomitic product.
Now the big thing with any of these limes is you want a very small particle size. If you've got a small particle size, I equate it to just like ice. If you're going to cool a drink down, do you put one ice cube in? Or would you expect more cooling if you used crushed ice? Well, the crushed ice cools faster because you have more surface area to make change. It's the same thing with lime. So there's going to be a big difference in lime sources, so you want to make sure you have them tested to see what the particle size is to know how quickly you're going to make a change in your soil.
And then you need to take a look at what's the cost. So what we usually suggest is, let's say you've got two different sources of lime, send them both into a lab, tell the lab, hey, this one costs X, this one costs Y, which one would be a better value for me, and they should be able to tell you.
All right, Brian, the other question we get a lot is about tillage. Do I till in the lime, and if so, how deeply do I till, and what if I'm in a no-till situation, can I still make the change?
Absolutely, it will work in no-till. It's just going to take more time. When you till it in, the change is going to occur more quickly, so don't get too worried about it if you're in no-till. But I would say this, if you are in no-till, maybe you want to put on less and do it over a longer period of time. With tillage, you can stir a lot of that lime in and get that all worked in, so you could run with a little bit higher rate. The problem with going with too high a rate, let's say I'm in no-till or even conventional till, if you go too high a rate, you can tie up some nutrients in the short term, so you got to be a little bit careful with what you do. Our standard recommendation is 2,400 pounds of actual calcium, not lime, but actual calcium. So look at your percentage on your lime test. And oh, speaking of tests, I would also test your lime for other nutrients, because you might get some other things out of your lime. For example, our lime that we get is water treatment lime, so we'll get some free sulfur, we'll get some free phosphorus, maybe even some free zinc and other micronutrients. So it's important to understand what all is in your lime.
The other question, Brian, is what time of year should we get lime out? Typically, we're seeing a lot of lime applied right after harvest. So you've got more time for it to be out on the soil to impact that change. You could do lime applications in the spring. that would be okay too. It's just that to impact that year's crop, well, it's probably not going to happen. It's probably going to start kicking in later in the season once you get some moisture to move it down through the soil profile.
One last question that I commonly get is, how about on rented ground? What do I do for rented ground? Well, first of all, I would talk to the landlord and say, look, we've got this pH. Lime is a long-term investment, so will you help me? Will you give me a long-term lease, or will you pay for part of the lime? Otherwise, what we do have some people doing is banding small rates of very available lime and just going that way. Now, I don't love that because lime to me is a soil amendment. I want to fix all the soil so I have better microbial activity. I have better overall root growth in the soil. But if you have to band it because you're on a cash rent and this is your last year having that ground, well, I can understand that.
One last thing is, where do you want your soil pH to be? For me, if I could pick one soil pH across my farm raising corn and soybeans, I like 6.3. But if you're at a high pH and you say, wow, I'm at an 8 now, I have to get all the way down to 6.3, we'd at least like to get down to a 6.8. And if you're coming up from the bottom and you say, man, I got pHs in the low 5s, I'd like to at least get up to that 6.2 or 6.3 range. If you're somewhere in that 6.3 to 6.8, that seems to be where the best nutrient availability is.
All right, but that all depends on the crop you're raising. We talked about this last week too. There are certain crops that like low pH, certain crops that like high pH. The reason why we were talking about lime today is if you want to raise the pH of your soil, you absolutely can do it with lime.
Well, I wish that lime would control our weed of the week, Brian, because that would make life so much easier. We'll show you what will stop our weed of the week coming up next.
The Weed of the Week is brought to you by Corteva Agriscience, Agriculture Division of Dow DuPont. Finish the fight against tough weeds with the Enlist Weed Control System.
Weeds are tough, but we're tougher. With unrivaled weed control, reduced drift, and near zero volatility. So, who's tough now?
Weed of the week is tansy mustard.
This is one of those weeds that you will see in the fall. A lot of times it germinates late in the fall or very early in the spring, so it's a difficult weed to control in wheat. We don't have as much issue with it in corn or even in soybeans, but in wheat, Brian, this one can really be a pain.
Yeah, it can, but we have such good products on this anymore. For example, Sharpen. You can use Sharpen in front of winter wheat or in front of spring wheat.
For a burn down or a pre-emerge.
Yes, absolutely. And so you could go out there with a couple ounces. It's going to cost you $8 to $10 an acre, something like that. And I realize if you're a wheat producer, you might say, well, I only want to spend $2 on herbicide. Well, then you're not probably going to get tansy mustard under control. It's going to require at least a little bit of investment, but we like the pre-emerge option, so then you can get it stopped and burned down potentially. Well, you could also go with Prepare because a lot of the tansy mustard is not ALS resistant.
But look at it this way, Brian. When we have a weed that's going to germinate in the fall or very early spring, once we get crop canopy, we're good. We've just got to get a good start. So these pre-emerge products are so important for tansy mustard and kochia and some of the most difficult to control broadleaf weeds that we've got in wheat and in other crops that we're going to seed very early in the season.
All right, let's talk about post-emerge. My favorite product would be Husky. Some of the ALS or sulfonylurea products will have a little bit of activity too, but I like Husky best.
All right, there are lots of great choices in corn. Verdict down is probably my favorite. Status over the top is my favorite there.
If you go to soybeans, I'm still going to recommend the 3-Pre program. You've got to get it burned down. Usually once you have this weed burned down or controlled in the beginning, it's not a problem later on, but certainly Roundup will control it. 2,4-D, Liberty, Dicamba, all depending on the trait you're using in your crop.
That's all the time we have for this week's Weed, but Iron Talk is coming up next.
What's the most complex industry on Earth? It isn't big data or commodities, not genetics or meteorology or even logistics. It's a business that involves them all. It's farming. And we're proud to work with generations of American farmers in the most complex and rewarding industry on Earth.
Your planter is the single most important piece of equipment on your farm, because without a uniform stand, you can't reach maximum yield. That's why Harvest International set out to design a planter that takes advantage of the newest innovations in planter technology. Built tough for high speed and integrated with the latest precision enhancements, Harvest International planters ensure every seed you plant today puts more in your bin at harvest. Harvest International, planting the future.
There are a lot of steps to having a perfect season. Don't let your fertilizer plan be the step that trips you up. No matter when you apply fertilizer, no matter how, AgroLiquid has the experts and the products that'll help you move closer to your target and hit the bullseye. AgroLiquid moves you closer to your target.
If you're looking to expand your farm's grain handling, you want everything to be fast and efficient. The Quick Belt from Norwood Sales is your all-around grain handling solution. Our conveyor-based system uses an 18-inch belt and a 10-inch tube, which minimizes seed damage while moving more than 10,000 bushels an hour. That's fast enough to fill a semi in 6 minutes. Plus, our hood is designed to gently direct the flow of grain straight down, keeping your crop in condition. Keep your grain and your farm moving with the Quick Belt from Norwood Sales.
You spend all year working hard to get as much yield as possible at harvest. The last thing you want to do is put your grain in the bin and have it spoil before you take it to market. Introducing the Grain Temp Guard from Farm Shop MFG. Designed and built by a farmer looking for a low-cost monitoring solution for existing bins, the Grain Temp Guard tracks temperature and humidity with an alarm system to alert you when your grain exceeds safe thresholds. For more information on a system for your bins, visit farmshopmfg.com.
Iron Talk is brought to you by Case IH.
At Harvest, you have one goal: finding the perfect flow of grain from the field to the bin. Case IH axial flow combines are engineered for matched capacity to deliver proven grain savings, so you can keep efficiency flowing smoothly. Find yours with the Case IH axial flow.
What type of hydraulic fluid do you use in your equipment? In today's Iron Talk, we'll discuss how upwards of 50% of the hydraulic oil being used in tractors today may be leading to poor performance and more breakdowns. I hope I caught your attention, because there is a big difference in hydraulic oils that you can buy for your tractors. Also, your attention to cleanliness can have an impact as well. Let's start at the cap and work our way through the system. Removing the dirt and contamination from the cap and cleaning the filter inside will keep your hydraulic oil clean. If the seal on the cap is not perfect, replace that seal. It's very cheap and super important. Then let's talk about that cheap yellow bucket of hydraulic oil sitting in your shop. Does it contain the right additives for your tractor specs? The reason why is that the gears, the wet brakes, and transmissions that you must protect are not like those on your car. For example, the transmission fluid for your car provides insufficient gear wear protection for your tractor. Cheap tractor hydraulic fluid may not be made of good stock, and certainly doesn't contain the right additives, as you'll often hear brake chatter with squealing and squawking. I know, it may cost $30 more for a bucket of good quality hydraulic fluid that meets or exceeds multiple OEM standards and meets the specs for your tractor fluid requirements, but it's a very small insurance policy to pay. Getting the right fluid helps extend the life of your tractor and results in far fewer breakdowns and overall better performance. Avoid sticking valves and clutch plates. Get the right hydraulic fluid for your high-performance tractors and equipment. That's all for today's Iron Talk, and now back to the show.
That's our time for today, but if you're looking for more agronomic information, we've got it. Check out the Ag PhD Insider magazine. You can go to agphdinsider.com.
And don't miss the next Ag PhD TV show. We'll have another Weed of the Week, Farm Basics, Iron Talk, and a whole lot more. I'm Darren Hefty.
And I'm Brian Hefty. Thanks for watching Ag PhD.